My name is Seraphina, and I am 38 years old. My husband Julian died 3 days ago in a car crash. I'm standing at his funeral right now, watching his brother Elijah check his watch. My sister-in-law Claire just told me I look pathetic. They think I'm broken. They think I'm weak. They think they've won. What they don't know is what Julian left me. Not the money, not the houses, just a single, old-fashioned key and a note that read, "Go to the farmhouse. Trust no one." Before I tell you what I found there, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever felt like the outsider in your own family. Trust me, you will want to see what happens next. The scent of thousands of white lilies and polished mahogany was suffocating. I stood by the open casket, my hand resting on the dark wood, my vision blurred by tears. I half expected Julian to open his eyes, flash that $1,000,000 smile, and tell me this was all a terrible, elaborate joke. He was only 42, too young, too vibrant, too alive. The pews of the First Baptist Church, the unofficial cathedral for Atlanta's black elite, were packed. It felt like the entire city was here. Politicians, business leaders, academics, and the old money families that made up the King family's world. They were all here for Julian King, the golden son of the King dynasty. But I felt utterly alone. My grief was a heavy, soundproof cloak, isolating me in plain sight while chatter and networking happened just feet away. Across the room I saw them, my brother-in-law, Elijah, and his wife, Claire. They weren't crying. Elijah, now the undisputed patriarch of the King family, wasn't even looking at the casket. He was looking at his gold watch. He leaned over and whispered something to Claire. She nodded, her perfectly styled blonde hair not moving an inch. She adjusted the cuff of her designer suit and then, spotting me, began to walk over. Her heels clicked ominously on the church's marble floor, a sound I had come to dread over the last decade. "Seraphina," she said. Her voice wasn't soft with sympathy. It was a low, sharp hiss like escaping steam. I flinched. She didn't offer a hand, no words of comfort. She just looked at me, her cold blue eyes scanning my appearance with undisguised contempt. "The investors are arriving," she whispered, as if discussing catering. "The governor will be here any minute. We need to wrap this up." I couldn't form words. Wrap this up? We were burying my husband. "I know this is difficult," she continued, her term for my grief. "But you look a mess. Your eyes are puffy. You need to go to the back vestibule and compose yourself. You're embarrassing the family in front of our partners." The cruelty was so familiar, it was almost numbing. This was the Claire I knew. In the 10 years I had been married to Julian, I never got used to her. She was a white woman from old Boston money, who had married into Atlanta's most prominent black family and immediately appointed herself the guardian of its legacy. She saw the King name as a brand, a dynasty. And I, Seraphina Washington, the daughter of a postal worker and a teacher from the South Side, was a blemish on that brand. I was too dark, too quiet, not from the right background. Julian had loved me for it. He said I was real, his anchor in a world of pretense. But for Claire, my authenticity was a liability. She saw me as the scholarship wife, the one who didn't belong. "He's my husband," I finally whispered, the words scratching my raw throat. "He was a king," she corrected me instantly, venomously. "And his legacy is what matters now, the family name." Elijah joined us then, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. It wasn't a gesture of comfort. It was a warning, a physical claim of dominance. "Seraphina," he said, his voice smooth and cold, so different from Julian's warmth. "Claire is right. We have business to attend to. Julian's passing complicates the trust. We need to focus on what's important." I tried to pull away from his touch, but his grip tightened. "Focus? My whole world just ended." Elijah's eyes hardened. "Your world? Seraphina, your world was funded by this family. and this family is now my responsibility. Julian is gone. Emotions are a luxury we can't afford. You need to remember your place. He leaned in closer. Don't do anything stupid. The threat was clear, hanging in the lily-scented air between us. Don't be difficult. Don't challenge me. I looked from Elijah's cold ambition to Claire's smug superiority. They weren't grieving. They were transitioning power. They saw Julian's death not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity, a corporate takeover, a chance to finally get rid of the mess he'd left behind. And I knew, in that moment, that I was at the top of their list. As I let them guide me toward the back room, like a child being dismissed from the adult table, my hand instinctively went to the single key in my coat pocket. The key Julian had pressed into my palm 2 months ago, after a terrible fight with Elijah. His eyes had been filled with a fear I didn't understand. If anything ever happens to me, Sarah, go to the farmhouse. Promise me. Don't tell Elijah. Trust no one. At the time, I thought he was being overly dramatic. Now, standing in the cold shadow of my husband's casket, I realized it had been a terrified warning. The King family mansion felt more like a corporate headquarters than a home in mourning. Hundreds of guests in expensive black attire moved through the oversized rooms, but the sound wasn't of weeping. It was the low, steady hum of networking. Men clinked glasses of expensive scotch in the study, and women gathered by the grand piano, discussing stock options and summer homes in Martha's Vineyard. Julian's death was not a tragedy here. It was a transition of power. I tried to find a familiar face, a friendly ear. I saw my cousin Aaliyah, standing near the catering table, and felt a rush of relief. But as I approached, she saw Elijah watching from across the room. Aaliyah's smile froze. She abruptly turned and walked in the opposite direction, suddenly fascinated by a floral arrangement. He had given the order. I was to be isolated. A widow in name, but a pariah in fact. I was the outsider, the woman from the South Side who had dared to marry their golden boy, and now that he was gone, my shield was gone too. Child, come here. The voice was frail but firm, cutting through the noise. I turned and saw Julian's mother, Cassandra King, sitting in a velvet armchair by the unlit fireplace, a heavy wool blanket draped over her knees, despite the Atlanta warmth. She was the only person in the room who looked like she was actually in mourning. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and her hands, twisted by arthritis, trembled as she held a glass of water. I knelt by her chair. "Mrs. King, I'm so sorry." She waved my apology away with a shaky hand. "Save it. Julian is gone. What matters now is what's left behind." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You need to be careful, Seraphina. You're a good girl, and Julian had a good heart. But he was always the soft one." Her eyes flickered toward the library, where Elijah was laughing loudly with Senator Cole. "Elijah," she said, her voice filled with a lifetime of resignation, "is the true heir. He was born to run this family. He doesn't have Julian's heart, but he has the stomach for it. He'll cut out anything or anyone he sees as a threat to the King legacy. Don't you dare get in his way." The warning settled on me, cold and heavy. She wasn't offering protection. She was stating a fact. She was telling me to surrender before the war even began. "Thank you for the warning, Mrs. King," I said, rising. She just nodded, turning her gaze back to the empty fireplace, already lost in her own grief. Before I could take 3 steps, Claire's voice cut through the room like a shard of glass. "Seraphina, darling! You simply must come and say hello." She was gliding toward me, her smile bright and artificial. She looped her arm through mine, her grip surprisingly strong, and began steering me toward the library. "Senator Cole was just asking about you. You must come and be the grieving widow. It's so important for appearances." The library was where the real power was. The air was thick with cigar smoke and the scent of brandy. Elijah was holding court, his back to the door, regaling a group of men in dark suits. "Senator?" Claire cooed, interrupting him. "Here she is, our poor, brave Seraphina." The senator, a tall man with a political smile, turned and took my hand. "Mrs. King, my deepest condolences. Julian was a pillar of this community." I murmured my thanks, feeling like an actress in a terrible play. And that's when it happened. Claire, in her haste to get back to Elijah's side, stumbled. Her full glass of Cabernet tilted, and a cascade of dark red wine splashed down the front of my simple black dress. Gasps filled the room. The senator pulled his hand back quickly. I froze, the cold liquid seeping through the fabric, the dark stain spreading over my chest like a fresh wound. "Oh, goodness!" Claire shrieked, her hand flying to her mouth. But her eyes, her cold blue eyes, were sparkling with malicious triumph. "Clumsy me! Oh, Seraphina, look at that! And on that, fabric." She reached out and touched the wet dress, her lip curling. "This cheap material just soaked it right up. It's absolutely ruined." The humiliation was instant and overwhelming. Every eye was on me. The men's expressions were a mixture of pity and embarrassment. Elijah sighed, annoyed by the interruption. "Claire, for God's sake," he muttered. "I know," Claire said, turning back to me, her voice dripping with fake pity. "You poor thing, you must be mortified." She put her hand on my arm, her touch a mockery of comfort. "Why don't you run along home and change? This is all so overwhelming for you anyway. We can handle the rest of the guests." "Go home." It was a dismissal. I was being kicked out of my own husband's funeral repast. My eyes burned, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of tears. I looked at Elijah, who simply turned back to the senator, already resuming his conversation. I was nothing. I nodded stiffly, pulling my arm from Claire's grasp. "Excuse me," I said to no one in particular. As I turned and walked out of the library, my head held high, I locked eyes with the one man who wasn't part of the inner circle. Mr. Thornton, the family lawyer. He was standing near the doorway, holding a briefcase, watching the entire scene unfold. He wasn't laughing like Claire, or dismissive like Elijah. His face was a mask of professional neutrality, but his eyes held an unmistakable look of pity. And something else. Something I couldn't quite place. A flicker of conflict? Or was it knowledge? It was a look that said, "You have no idea what's really going on." The thought was so unsettling that I almost stumbled. I hurried my pace, desperate to escape the house, the stairs, and the cold, calculating eyes of the family I had tried so hard to be a part of. The air in Mr. Thornton's office was stale and cold. The mahogany-paneled walls seemed to absorb all the sound, all the light, leaving only the oppressive weight of what was about to happen. I sat on a stiff leather chair that felt miles away from the imposing desk. My grief was still a raw, physical thing, a shard of glass in my chest. But sitting here, it felt inappropriate. This wasn't a place for mourning. This was an execution. Elijah and Claire were already seated facing the lawyer. They looked rested. Claire, in a sharp black dress that was more fashionable than somber, was scrolling through her phone. Elijah was studying a financial report from his briefcase, as if this was just another Tuesday morning meeting. Mr. Thornton finally entered, his face grim. He avoided looking at me directly as he took his seat. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. As the executor of the King Family Trust, Elijah, you are aware of most of what's in Julian's final will and testament, but we must read it officially." He put on his glasses and began to read. The legal language washed over me, a dense fog of wherefore and bequeathed. I tried to focus, but my mind kept drifting to the smell of lilies at the church, to the cold finality of the casket. Then, certain phrases cut through the haze. All commercial real estate holdings. All stock portfolios and investment accounts. The primary residence located at 4500 Peachtree Battle. Wait. I sat up straighter. 4500 Peachtree Battle? That was our home. My home. Mr. Thornton continued, his voice a monotone drone. Are hereby transferred, consolidated, and assigned to the King Family Trust, to be managed in perpetuity. I felt the air leave my lungs. The floor seemed to drop away. The sole executor and administrator of said trust, Mr. Thornton read, with full and unconditional authority over all its assets, will be Mr. Elijah King. Claire's phone finally went dark as she looked up, a small, tight smile playing on her lips. She had won. Excuse me, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Mr. Thornton paused, looking at me over his glasses. Mr. Thornton, there must be a mistake. Our home, the house on Peachtree Battle, it's jointly owned. My name is on the deed. Julian and I flashed back to the day we signed the papers, the sun streaming into the very office I was sitting in now. Julian had grabbed my hand, his laugh echoing. This is it, Sarah, our house, yours and mine, forever. He'd kissed my knuckles, and I'd felt a sense of security I hadn't known since childhood. Claire let out a sound, a delicate, pitying scoff. Oh, Seraphina, how naive. Did you really think that mattered? Elijah leaned forward, silencing his wife with a look before sliding a single sheet of paper across the desk. Julian was many things, Seraphina, he said, his voice smooth. But in the end, he was not stupid. He knew his legacy. He knew who was strong enough to protect it. I looked down at the paper. It was a quitclaim deed. It transferred full ownership of our home from Julian and Seraphina King to the King Family Trust. And at the bottom, dated 6 weeks ago, was Julian's signature. Bold, confident, and unmistakable. 6 weeks ago. It was right after that terrible fight. No, not our fight. It was after the fight he had with Elijah. The one that had left him pale and distant for days. He signed it, I breathed, the betrayal of fresh, cold shock that eclipsed even my grief. He signed our home away. He did what was necessary to protect the family, Elijah said, retracting the document. He knew who was strong enough to carry the name. The implication was clear. I was not. I was numb. I had lost my husband, and now I realized he had disowned me before he even died. I had lost my home. I had lost the last 10 years of my life. I was a widow with nothing, Mr. Thornton cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. There is one other item, a codicil specifically for Mrs. Seraphina Washington King. Elijah and Claire looked annoyed, as if this was a loose end, a minor inconvenience. To my wife Seraphina, Mr. Thornton read, I leave, separate and apart from the trust, the full deed and ownership of the farmhouse property in Morgan County and all contents therein. Claire's laughter was not a small chuckle. It was a loud, sharp, ugly burst of sound that shattered the heavy silence in the lawyer's office. Morgan County? She shrieked, pressing a hand to her chest, as if she'd just heard the funniest joke of her life. Oh, Julian, that is perfect. That is just priceless. She turned to me, her eyes sparkling with malicious triumph. That dump? That shack hasn't been touched in 20 years. It's condemned. Does it even have running water, Seraphina? Or did he expect you to live off the land? Elijah smirked, leaning back in his chair. It's a liability, Seraphina. The property taxes are delinquent. The structure is unsound. It's not a gift. It's a final joke from a man who clearly felt guilty about something. I stared at Mr. Thornton, but he wouldn't meet my gaze. I wasn't processing their words. I was processing the location. Morgan County. The farmhouse. The one place on earth Julian had ever forbidden me from going. My mind flashed back to 4 years ago. I'd been organizing our finances and saw the property tax bill for a parcel of land I didn't recognize. What's this, honey? This farmhouse in Morgan County? Julian's entire demeanor changed. The blood drained from his face, and his eyes, usually so warm, turned to ice. He slammed his coffee mug down, shattering it on the granite countertop. "Do not!" he'd yelled, his voice a terrifying boom I'd never heard before. "Ever ask me about that place again. You will never go there. You will never speak of it. It's where I buried my mistakes." His reaction was so violent, so unlike him, that I'd been terrified. I never brought it up again. And now it was mine. The only thing that was mine. The place where he buried his mistakes. What mistake? What had he hidden there that was so terrible? Elijah, mistaking my shocked silence for despair, saw his opening. He slid a fresh document across the mahogany desk, along with a heavy, expensive pen. "Look, Seraphina," he said, adopting a tone of false patience, as if speaking to a child. "I'm willing to be generous. This is a waiver, a simple transfer. Sign the farmhouse over to the King Family Trust. It's worthless to you, but it's still technically a family asset, and I like to keep the books clean." I just stared at the paper. What do I get?" I whispered, hating how weak I sounded. "Get?" Elijah raised an eyebrow. "You get my goodwill." He leaned forward, the mask of civility dropping. "Here's the deal. You are a widow with no job, no home, and no family that will claim you. You have nothing. Sign that paper, and I will be persuaded to approve a monthly stipend from the trust. A small allowance to keep you comfortable while you figure out your next steps. Refuse to sign?" He shrugged. "Then you will leave this office with exactly what Julian left you. A condemned shack and the clothes on your back. Your choice." This was it. The final humiliation. He was blackmailing me. I was being offered a stipend to live on, like a dismissed servant, in exchange for the only thing my husband had left me. My hand trembled. I looked at Mr. Thornton, pleading with my eyes. He just shuffled his papers, his face a mask of professional neutrality. He worked for the trust, and Elijah was the trust. I was alone. I picked up the pen. The weight of it felt like a ton of bricks. I had no choice. I was homeless. I was penniless. My family had turned on me. My husband had disowned me before he even died. I took a deep breath, the smell of betrayal thick in the air. I put the pen to the paper. "Wait." The word was quiet, but it cut through the room like a blade. We all turned. Mr. Thornton, the lawyer, was looking directly at me, his face no longer neutral. There was something alive in his eyes. Conflict, maybe even pity. Elijah's face darkened. "What is it, Thornton? This is a simple transaction." "Not quite," the lawyer said. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single sealed envelope. It was thick, cream-colored, and my name was written on the front in Julian's familiar, elegant handwriting. Elijah and Claire stared at it, their shock and confusion evident. This was not part of their plan. "Julian left this with me privately," Mr. Thornton said, sliding it past Elijah's document, directly in front of me. "His instructions were explicit. I was to give it to you, and only you, after the official will had been read." My fingers trembled so badly I could barely tear the envelope open. Elijah started to stand. "What is that?" "I am the executor. All documents should come to me." "Sit down, Elijah," Mr. Thornton said, his voice suddenly steel. "This is privileged communication between husband and wife. You have no authority here." Inside the envelope were two items. The first was an old-fashioned ornate skeleton key, heavy and cold in my palm. The second was a single piece of Julian's personal stationery, folded in half. I opened it. "Sarah, forgive me. Forgive me for the lies. Forgive me for not being strong enough. Do not trust Elijah. He is hunting for it. He thinks it's in the farmhouse. He thinks it's a thing, but it's a truth. Do not sell. Do not sign anything. Go to the farmhouse. Go alone. This key does not open the cellar, it opens the old chest in the attic. The truth is in there. I am so sorry. I loved you. I always loved you. I left Mr. Thornton's office in a daze, clutching the key and the letter. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut behind me, sealing me off from the life I had known. Elijah and Claire remained inside, probably celebrating their victory, already dividing my life between them. I walked through the opulent lobby, my heels sinking into the plush carpet, feeling like a ghost. I got into my car, the one Julian had bought me, and my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't put the key in the ignition for a full minute. I just sat there, rereading Julian's words. Forgive me. Trust no one. Go alone. The truth is in there. The drive back to the house on Peachtree Battle was the longest 15 minutes of my life. This wasn't just a house. It was our home. The home I had decorated. The home where we hosted parties. The home where I had cried 3 nights ago when I learned he was dead. When I pulled up to the imposing wrought iron gates, I fumbled for the security remote. I pressed the button. Nothing. I pressed it again. The small red light on the panel didn't even blink. My blood ran cold. No, I whispered. I got out and walked to the security keypad by the pedestrian gate. I punched in our code, the one that was our anniversary. Access denied. I tried Julian's birthday. Access denied. I tried my own. Access denied. He wouldn't. He couldn't. Not this fast. I was about to call the security company when I heard a voice from the intercom. Can I help you? It was Claire. I stepped back, my confusion turning to acid in my stomach. Claire? What are you doing? I can't get in. The code isn't working. There was a pause, and then I heard her light, musical laugh. Oh, Seraphina, of course it isn't. Elijah had the system updated this morning. For security, you understand. What are you talking about? I live here. My things are in there. I need to pack. Don't be silly, Claire's voice lilted through the speaker. We've already taken care of that for you. We knew you'd be distressed. The gate buzzed and clicked open, not the main gate for cars, just the small, narrow pedestrian gate, like I was a servant being granted temporary access. I pushed it open and walked up the long, winding driveway, my footsteps echoing in the silence. Claire was waiting for me on the porch, sipping a glass of lemonade, looking completely at ease. She was wearing one of my silk robes, the one Julian had bought me from Paris. Claire, what is going on? I need my clothes, my passport, my things. Elijah has taken possession of the estate on behalf of the trust, she said, examining her fingernails. As he told you, the house belongs to the trust now, not to you. She smiled, a bright, terrible smile. But don't worry, I had the staff pack up your personal items. They're in the garage. She led me not through the front door, but around the side to the 3-car garage. She pressed a button, and the door rumbled open. There, in the middle of the pristine, epoxied floor where my car used to be, sat 4 large, black trash bags. What is this? I asked, my voice shaking. This is you, Seraphina, she said, taking a sip of lemonade. Photos, old college textbooks, your grandmother's quilt, that dreadful little clay pot you made in pottery class, all those sentimental things. We've kept the valuable items, of course, the art, the jewelry. Julian would want those to stay with the family. I tore open one of the bags. My wedding album was stuffed inside, its white satin cover bent and soiled. Photos of my parents, my old life, all jumbled together. She had literally thrown my life into the garbage. How could you? How could we? She said, her voice turning sharp. How could Julian? This is the mess he left us to clean up. Now I suggest you take your bags and go. Go where? I screamed, the tears finally coming. You've frozen my bank accounts. My credit cards are declined. You've taken my home. That sounds like a personal problem, Claire said, her smile returning. Not a family one. You should have thought of that before you were you. She turned and walked back into my house, the door clicking shut behind her. I was left standing in the garage with 4 trash bags and the ruins of my life. I couldn't even call a cab. I had no money. Elijah had locked me out of everything. Or Almost everything. I walked back down the long driveway, got into my car, and drove. I drove to my old bank, the small community credit union I'd used before I ever met Julian, the bank where I'd kept my before life. I still had the debit card in the back of my wallet, a relic I never bothered to throw away. I walked up to the ATM and prayed. I hadn't touched the account in 10 years. I put the card in, entered the PIN, my old zip code, and held my breath. Checking. 4,217.58. I'd left it there, forgot about it. It was just enough for gas, enough for food, enough to disappear. I drove to the house I'd grown up in on the south side. I parked across the street from my old Honda Civic, the one my dad had given me when I turned 16. It was dusty and had a flat tire, but it was mine. It wasn't a king asset. Elijah couldn't touch it. I spent an hour changing the tire and wiping it down. I transferred my trash bags of memories from the luxury sedan to the beat-up coupe. I left the sedan on the side of the road with the keys in it. Let Elijah's trust come and get it. I got into the Honda. The familiar smell of old upholstery and armorall filled my lungs. I put the key in the ignition. It started on the first try. I gripped the plastic steering wheel, my hands steady now. I just buried my husband 48 hours ago. My family has taken my home, my money, and my dignity. And now, I am driving to the one place he forbade me to go, a condemned shack in the middle of nowhere. My only hope in the world rests on an old key and a dead man's secrets. I put the car in gear and drove south, away from Atlanta, away from the Kings, and toward the truth. The 2-hour drive to Morgan County felt like crossing into another dimension. I left the sprawling, manicured lawns of Atlanta behind, watching the highway narrow and the landscape change. The farther I drove, the thicker the pine trees became, crowding the road, blocking out the sun. My old Honda's gas gauge dipped into the red, just as I passed a worn wooden sign that read, "Welcome to Morgan County. Population 2,140. I pulled into the only sign of life I'd seen in 30 miles, a combination gas station and diner called the Morgan Feed and Fuel. Its neon sign flickered, with the F in fuel burned out. I parked next to a rusty pickup truck and walked inside, my city clothes feeling like a costume. The diner was small, maybe 6 booths and a long formica counter. 3 older men in work overalls stopped their conversation and turned to stare at me over their coffee cups. I could feel their eyes tracking me as I sat at the counter, a wave of self-consciousness washing over me. I was an outsider, a problem. A woman with a kind, wrinkled face and a name tag that read Mabel wiped her hands on her apron and slid a coffee mug in front of me. "What can I get for you, honey?" she asked, her voice a warm, southern drawl. "Just coffee, please. And I need to fill up my car. Pump number 2. She nodded, pouring the dark liquid. Her eyes lingered on my face for a moment too long. "You're that Mrs. King, aren't you?" she asked, not unkindly. "Saw you on the news. About your husband, Julian." My breath caught. Of course. The King family name meant something, even out here. "Yes," I whispered, my hand tightening around the mug. "That's me." Mabel shook her head, her expression softening into genuine sympathy. "Lord, child, that's a heavy burden to carry. I'm so sorry for your loss. Mr. Julian was a good man. He always left a $20 tip, even if he just had coffee." My head snapped up. You knew Julian?" Mabel let out a short laugh. "Knew him? Honey, he practically paid my light bill. Mr. Julian was in here for lunch almost every week for the past 2 years." The room seemed to tilt. Every week? Julian told me he was in meetings on Tuesdays. He told me he was at the office. He'd been lying. He'd been coming here. "He came here often?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Every Tuesday like clockwork," Mabel said, refilling my mug. Him and his brother. Though lunch might be a generous word for it, it was mostly arguing. My heart started to pound, a slow, heavy beat against my ribs. Arguing? My brother-in-law, Elijah? That's the one, Mabel said, leaning against the counter. Tall fellow, looks like he's sucking on a lemon all the time. Not friendly like your husband. She lowered her voice. They'd take that back booth and you could hear them clear across the diner. Always fighting. Always about that old farmhouse. My blood turned to ice. Elijah. Elijah, who had smirked and said the farmhouse was a condemned dump. He said it was worthless. He claimed he didn't even know its condition. He had been here every week, fighting with Julian about it. What? What did they fight about? I asked, my voice barely audible. Mabel shrugged. Lord, who knows with rich folks? Money, I suppose. Always money. But that last time, that was a bad one. About a month ago, I'd say. We thought we were going to have to call the sheriff. She leaned in, her eyes wide with the memory. Mr. Elijah was on his feet, his face all red and blotchy. He slammed his hand on the table, broke his water glass. He was screaming at Mr. Julian, screaming about that psycho bitch and how Julian had betrayed the family. That psycho bitch. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. A woman. There was a woman at the farmhouse. Julian's mistake wasn't a bad investment. It was a person. He said, Mabel continued, that he was going to bury her right along with Julian if he didn't fix it. Said he wouldn't let his family's legacy be destroyed by some, well, I can't repeat the word he used. And then he stormed out. Mr. Julian just sat there for a long time. He looked broken. He paid for the broken glass and left the biggest tip I've ever seen. That was the last time I saw him. I fumbled in my purse, throwing a $10 bill on the counter. I have to go. How do I get to the farmhouse? Mabel's kind face creased with worry. Honey, I don't know what's out there, but after that fight, I'm not sure it's a place you want to go alone. Mr. Elijah seemed real serious. I have to, I said, my voice hardening. I paid for the gas and walked out of the diner, the stares of the men following me. I got into my old Honda, my mind racing. Julian's note. Don't trust Elijah, he's hunting for it. He wasn't hunting for a thing, he was hunting for a person. Elijah hadn't just lied to me, he had lied about everything. He knew about the farmhouse, he'd been there. He was fighting with Julian about a woman. And now, Julian was dead, and Elijah was trying to blackmail me into giving him the one place that held all the answers. I started the car, the key Julian had left me feeling heavy and cold in my pocket. I wasn't just grieving anymore, I was terrified. And I was furious. Mabel's words echoed in my head, a terrifying soundtrack to the last 10 miles of the drive. Betrayed the family. Psycho bitch, bury her. The old Honda struggled up the winding gravel road, pine branches scraping against the windows like skeletal fingers. Elijah had been here. He had lied. Claire had called it a condemned shack. But as I rounded the final bend, I slammed on the brakes. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from fear but from sheer confusion. The farmhouse wasn't a shack. It wasn't a dump. It was normal. It was a simple, 2-story white farmhouse, the kind you see on postcards. The lawn was neatly mowed. The black shutters were freshly painted. There were potted ferns on the porch, swaying gently in the breeze. There was no crumbling foundation, no boarded-up windows, no sign of decay. This wasn't a ruin. It was a perfectly maintained, empty house. The lie was so blatant, so unnecessary. Why? Why tell me it was worthless if it was clearly being cared for? I got out of the car, my legs unsteady. The key Julian had left me felt heavy in my pocket. I walked up the porch steps, my footsteps echoing in the afternoon silence. The key slid easily into the front door lock. It turned with a smooth, oiled click. I pushed the door open. Hello? My voice sounded small, immediately absorbed by the stillness. The air inside was cool and clean, no dust, no cobwebs. The living room was fully furnished with tasteful, expensive, and completely impersonal furniture. A beige sofa, a glass coffee table, a muted floral rug. It looked like a model home, a place designed to be looked at, not lived in. There were no photographs on the mantel, no books on the shelves, no clutter on the counters. It was the cleanest, coldest house I had ever seen. I ran a finger along a windowsill, not a speck of dust. Someone had been here. Someone was paying for this place to be kept up, to be cleaned. "What is this place, Julian?" I whispered into the empty room. Was this a safe house? A secret getaway? I walked through the rooms one by one. A dining room with a table set for 6, though it looked like no meal had ever been eaten there. A kitchen with brand new stainless steel appliances, the protective plastic still on the microwave display. I opened the refrigerator. It was completely empty, except for a single unopened bottle of water. This wasn't a home. It was a stage. It was a front for something else. My mind raced. Julian had been lying to me for years, not just about this house, but about his weekly schedule, about his relationship with Elijah. And Elijah was lying to me about, well, about everything. I remembered Julian's words to me, the ones that had terrified me 4 years ago. "It's where I buried my mistakes." Mistakes. Plural. I remembered Mabel's words from the diner. "That psycho bitch." I thought of the cellar, a place to bury things. I found the door just off the kitchen, under the main staircase, exactly where it would be in a house this old. But when I saw it, I froze again. This door did not match the rest of the house. The house was old wood and brass fixtures. This door was heavy, solid steel, like a bank vault. And where a simple keyhole or deadbolt should have been, there was a modern digital keypad, its small green light blinking steadily. This was it. This was the secret. The sterile, perfect house was just a disguise for whatever was behind this door. I fumbled in my pocket for the old-fashioned skeleton key Julian had left me. It was heavy and ornate. I held it up to the sleek digital lock. It was useless. The key was a relic from the 1800s. The lock was from this century. A new wave of despair washed over me. He had left me a clue I couldn't solve. He had given me a key that opened nothing. I leaned my head against the cold steel door, defeated. Elijah was hunting for this. He knew about this door. And Julian was dead. I pulled the key back, my fingers tracing its intricate metalwork. I looked at it again. Useless. I closed my eyes, trying to picture Julian's letter, his last words to me. "Trust no one. He's hunting for it." And then the words came back to me, clear as a bell. "This key does not open the cellar. It opens the old chest in the attic." My eyes snapped open. The attic. I wasn't at the end of the puzzle. I was at the beginning. I left the cold, sterile kitchen and that imposing steel door behind me. The attic. Julian's letter had said the attic. The key was for a chest. I found the attic stairs hidden behind a cheap-looking panel in the back hallway, a narrow, rickety set of steps that groaned in protest as I put my weight on them. The air grew warmer, thicker as I climbed. The smell was completely different from the staged, sterile house below. This was the real house. It smelled of old wood, dried pine needles, and decades of dust. Cobwebs clung to my hair and my face as I pushed open the small, warped door at the top. The attic was vast, stretching the entire length of the farmhouse. It was cast in shadows and stripes of light from a single filthy round window at the far end. This room was filled with the forgotten things. Old furniture covered in white sheets stood like ghosts in the gloom. Dressmakers' dummies, old trunks, and countless boxes were stacked in precarious piles. This was where the King family history had been left to rot. Claire had called the house a dump. No, this was the dump. This was the part they didn't even bother to clean. I moved past the ghostly shapes, my feet stirring up clouds of dust that danced in the single weak beam of light. And there, in the farthest, darkest corner, almost hidden behind a broken rocking horse, was a large, domed wooden chest. It was bound in tarnished brass, looking like something from a pirate's ship. My heart was pounding. This was it. I knelt on the dusty floorboards, my hands shaking as I pulled the heavy, ornate key from my pocket. It looked ancient, almost medieval. I blew the dust off the keyhole on the chest and slid the key in. It didn't just fit. It clicked into place with a satisfying, heavy thunk, as if a mechanism deep inside had been waiting for decades. I turned the key. A loud crack echoed in the silent attic as the lock mechanism released. I lifted the heavy lid. The smell of cedar, old paper, and something faintly chemical wafted out. I braced myself. Money? Gold? What secret was so important that Elijah was hunting for it? But there were no jewels, no stacks of cash, just papers. Old, yellowed papers, bundled in faded red ribbon. A thick, leather-bound photo album. And on top of it all, a stack of what looked like official documents. I picked up the top one. It was a medical degree from Johns Hopkins University. Doctor of Philosophy in Biochemistry. I read the name, and my blood ran cold. Dr. Lena Annalise King. King? Who was Lena King? I had been married to Julian for 10 years. I knew his family. There was Elijah, the oldest. Julian, the middle. That was it. I had never, not once, heard the name Lena. I had seen the family portraits in the Atlanta mansion. I had been to every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every baptism. There was no Lena. I dropped the degree and grabbed the heavy photo album. The leather was stiff and cracking. I opened it. The first page was a black and white photo of 3 children sitting on the steps of the Atlanta mansion. A very young Elijah, scowling even then. A smiling, gap-toothed Julian. And standing between them, her arms slung protectively around both their shoulders, was a young black girl, maybe 10 years old. She was beautiful, with bright, intelligent eyes and a confident, radiant smile. Underneath, in faded ink, the caption read, Elijah, Lena, and Julian. Summer 1992. I turned the page, and my hands started to shake. Lena and Julian building a treehouse. Lena, a few years older, winning a citywide science fair, holding a massive trophy. Julian and Elijah standing beside her, actually looking proud. Lena at her high school graduation, wearing the valedictorian sash. Lena at her Johns Hopkins graduation, her face glowing with achievement. She wasn't a distant cousin. She wasn't a family friend. She was their sister. The firstborn daughter. The true heir. Why? My mind couldn't grasp it. Why had they erased her? Why had Julian never spoken her name? Why was her entire life, her degrees, her photographs, hidden in a dusty chest in a forbidden farmhouse? I felt sick. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a secret. This was an erasure. At the bottom of the chest, I found a small leather-bound journal. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was Julian's. I opened it. It was dated 15 years ago, shortly after Julian and I had first started getting serious. September 10th. Elijah did it. He finally, truly did it. He stole her life's work. And Claire, Claire helped him. I sat on the dusty floor, the attic fading away, as Julian's anguished words from 15 years ago painted a picture of the ultimate, foundational betrayal. Lena wasn't just smart. She was a once-in-a-generation genius. While in her doctoral program, she had developed a revolutionary drug compound, a treatment for Huntington's disease. A miracle drug, potentially worth billions of dollars. She had trusted her family. She had trusted Elijah, the business-minded older brother, to help her patent and license it. But Elijah didn't see a cure. he saw a payday. According to Julian's diary, Elijah, with the legal help of his new girlfriend, Claire, who was just a legal intern at the time, had tricked Lena. They gave her documents to sign, telling her they were standard incorporation papers. Instead, she had signed away her intellectual property rights. She signed her entire life's work over to a new shell corporation, a corporation owned by Elijah King. A later entry, from 2 months after that, was stained with what looked like a tear. Elijah sold it. He sold her research, her patent, her entire future, to a massive pharmaceutical conglomerate for a sum I can't even write down. It's the money he used to found the King Family Trust. The entire King fortune, the legacy Elijah is so proud of, it's all built on her stolen genius. It's blood money, and I just stood by and watched. I did nothing. I closed the journal, my body cold with shock. The King family's old money, their legacy, wasn't old at all. It was new, and it was stolen. They had built their entire empire on the ruins of their sister's life. I finally understood why Elijah wanted this farmhouse. He wasn't just hunting for a thing. He was hunting for her. But where was she? If they stole her work, if they erased her from the family history, where had Lena King gone? I sat on the dusty attic floor, my body numb, my mind reeling. The King family fortune, the legacy Elijah was so proud of, the empire that fueled Claire's arrogance, it was all a lie. It was all built on the stolen genius of a woman they had erased. I thought that was the end of the story. But Julian's diary had more pages. My fingers, stained with the grime of the chest, trembled as I turned to the next entry. It was dated almost a year after the patent theft. It began with a single, shaky sentence. Lena fought back, and they destroyed her for it. I read on, my horror growing, my breath catching in my throat. Lena, realizing her work had been stolen and sold, hadn't just accepted her fate. She was a fighter. She gathered her remaining research, hired a lawyer, and filed a massive lawsuit against Elijah, against Claire, and against the pharmaceutical giant who had bought her stolen discovery. She was going to expose them all, but she never got the chance. Julian's diary detailed the retaliation with agonizing, sickening clarity. It wasn't a legal defense. It was the systematic, cold-blooded destruction of a human being. Elijah and Claire used the very money they had stolen from her to crush her. They bought her lawyer, Julian wrote. They threatened her colleagues into silence. They paid her trusted lab assistant, a woman Lena had mentored for years, to sign a false affidavit, testifying that Lena had faked her data, that the Huntington's compound was unstable and worthless. They painted her as a fraud, a failure who was lashing out because her own research had failed. But the legal assassination wasn't enough. They needed to silence her, permanently. This, Julian wrote, was Claire's masterpiece. Claire, the ambitious legal intern who had just married into the family, saw Lena as a permanent threat to her new position. She was the one who suggested the new angle. She isn't just a fraud, Claire had argued to the family. She's unstable. They began planting the seeds. They told family friends that Lena was struggling with a severe breakdown. They paid a psychiatrist, a supposed family friend, to meet with Lena under the guise of helping her cope with the stress of the lawsuit. That doctor later provided a sworn affidavit stating that Dr. Lena King was suffering from paranoid delusions and an obsessive fixation on her brother Elijah. "She's obsessed with me," Elijah had claimed in court. "She's angry I'm successful. She fabricated this entire story about a stolen patent. She's dangerous." Julian's handwriting became almost illegible here, a frantic scrawl that barely stayed on the lines. They won. The judge dismissed her lawsuit based on the overwhelming expert medical testimony. Citing her instability and delusions, Elijah was granted full medical conservatorship over his adult sister. He had her legally declared incompetent, and then he made her disappear. The final entry on that page was short. "They flew her out this morning." A private clinic near Lake Geneva, Switzerland. High-end. More like a luxury prison. She's gone. Elijah gets the money. Claire gets her place in the family. And I get my career. That was the bargain. I said nothing. 15 years. They had locked her in a mental hospital in Switzerland for 15 years. The psycho bitch Mabel at the diner had heard Elijah screaming about. It was his sister. I threw the journal across the attic. The sound it made hitting the wall was a dull, final thud. I was choking. I couldn't breathe. This was the mistake Julian had told me he'd buried. Not an affair, not a bad investment. This was so much worse. He had stood by and watched his brother and sister-in-law steal his sister's life, her work, and her sanity. He watched them erase her from the family portraits, and he did nothing. His silence bought his successful career as Atlanta's star architect. His silence bought the luxury cars, the trips to Europe, the Peachtree Battle Mansion. His silence bought me. I was the wife he acquired as part of his new, successful, Lena-free life. I wasn't just married to a liar. I was married to a coward. The man I had loved and mourned, he was a monster. I sat there for a long time, the dust settling around me. The sun was starting to set, casting long orange shadows through the single dirty window. The anger was so cold it felt like ice in my veins. Elijah had stolen the patent. Claire had engineered the insanity plea. Julian had watched it all happen. But something didn't make sense. Julian's letter. He's hunting for it. Why would Elijah be hunting for anything? He'd already won. Lena was gone. The money was secure. And then, the biggest question of all hit me. A terrifying, illogical thought that made my skin crawl. If Dr. Lena King has been locked in a Swiss asylum for the past 15 years, then who is in the cellar? Why build a high-tech reinforced steel door? Why was Julian coming here every single week? Why was Elijah also coming here just a month ago, fighting with Julian, threatening to bury her? This wasn't an old secret. This wasn't a mistake from the past. This was a current operation. I scrambled to my feet, my mind racing. Julian wasn't just a coward who had made a mistake. He was a man living a profound double life. The immaculate, empty house below wasn't a shrine to a past guilt. It was a guard post. It was a facade for a present-day secret. I ran down the rickety attic stairs, my hands covered in the grime of the past. I didn't care about the lies anymore. I didn't care about the stolen money. I needed to know what was behind that steel door. I stood in front of the steel door again, but this time I wasn't a grieving widow. I was the keeper of a terrible secret. Julian's guilt wasn't just in his diary. It was built into this house. This pristine, empty, perfectly maintained house was his penance. The state-of-the-art digital lock on this steel door wasn't just to keep people out. It was to protect what was inside. He's hunting for it, Julian's note had said. He meant Elijah. Elijah had been here. He'd been fighting with Julian, trying to get inside. And Julian had built this fortress to stop him. I looked at the keypad, 4 digits. A green light blinked patiently. I thought about the man I married. The man I thought I married. What code would he use? He was a man of anniversaries, of memories. I entered our wedding date, 0612. The keypad flashed red and beeped angrily. Access denied. Of course, our marriage was the lie. It was the cover story. Why would the key to his real life be tied to his fake one? I tried his birthday. 0905. Access denied. My birthday. 0420. Access denied. I tried the address of our Atlanta home. 4500. Access denied. I felt a familiar cold sting of rejection. Even in death, I was locked out. Every code that represented me, that represented us, was wrong. Because we were wrong. We were the mistake he had to maintain, while this place was his truth. I slumped against the wall, the adrenaline from the attic fading, replaced by a cold, hollow exhaustion. I had the key, but it was for the past. I needed the code for the present. I had to be missing something. The letter had said the key opened the chest. The chest held the truth, but maybe it held more. I forced myself back up the rickety stairs, the dust and cobwebs feeling strangely comforting now. This attic was the only honest room in the house. I knelt by the open chest, the smell of cedar and old paper filling my lungs. I ran my fingers through the contents again. Lena's degrees, Julian's diary, the bundles of letters. I sifted through the photo album, the one that proved Lena existed. I turned every page, looking for a note, a number, anything. Nothing. Just sad, faded pictures of a family that had cannibalized itself. I was about to give up. I closed the heavy album cover, a frustrated tear tracing a path through the grime on my cheek. As I did, my fingers brushed against a small lump inside the leather binding. A tiny slit, barely visible. My heart leaped. I used my fingernail to pry it open. Tucked deep inside the lining was one last photograph, small and square, its edges creased. It was a picture of Julian and Lena as very young children, maybe 6 and 8 years old, sitting under a massive oak tree. They were both grinning, their arms slung around each other, sharing a secret. They looked happy, unbroken. I turned the small photo over. On the back, in what looked like a child's careful printing, was a short inscription. J and L. Forever. 10/16. My breath hitched. 10/16. October 16th. I scrambled back to the attic door, nearly tripping on the stairs in my haste. I stood in front of the steel door, my hand shaking. This was it. This had to be it. The code wasn't for me, his wife of 10 years. It wasn't for his own birthday. It was for her. Lena. The sister he had betrayed, the sister he had spent the rest of his life trying to atone for. I raised my finger to the keypad, the green light blinking. I pressed the numbers 1, 0, 1, 6. For a second, nothing happened. Then, there was a heavy thud as a deadbolt retracted deep within the steel. A hydraulic hiss followed, and the massive door slowly, smoothly swung inward, opening onto a small, brightly lit landing. A wave of cold, sterile air washed over my face, carrying a faint, antiseptic smell. A smell I associated with hospitals. This wasn't a cellar. This wasn't a bunker. It was an elevator. A modern, industrial elevator, hidden in the basement of a forgotten farmhouse. I stepped inside, my hand trembling as I pressed the only button, the one marked with a simple down arrow. The steel doors slid shut, sealing me inside, and with a gentle hum, I began to descend deep into the earth, into the heart of Julian's last and most desperate secret. The descent was silent, smooth, and terrifying. The elevator hummed, a low, clean sound that was completely out of place in the rustic farmhouse above. I gripped the steel handrail, my knuckles white, as I watched the floor indicator light up. B1, B2, B3. 3 floors, 3 stories down, buried beneath the red Georgia clay. What had Julian built here? A bunker? A vault? A prison? The antiseptic smell grew stronger, that clean, chemical scent of hospitals. The doors slid open with a whisper, revealing not a dark cellar, but a corridor so bright it made me flinch. The walls were sterile white, the floors a polished gray epoxy. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. It was a laboratory, a full-blown, state-of-the-art, multi-million-dollar biomedical facility. My mind couldn't reconcile the two worlds. Above me was a simple, empty farmhouse. Below me was something out of a science fiction movie. I walked slowly down the corridor, my footsteps echoing. I passed doors with digital keypads and small glass windows, revealing rooms filled with humming freezers, complex machinery, and centrifuges. This wasn't just a lab, it was a major research center. The corridor opened into a larger central room, and that's when I saw them. The room was dominated by a single high-tech hospital bed. In it, a boy was sleeping. He looked to be about 16, with a thin face and Julian's high cheekbones. He was frail, his skin pale against the white pillows. An IV line snaked into his arm, connected to a bag of clear fluid. A complex monitor beside the bed tracked his vitals, its rhythmic beeping the only sound in the room. A woman stood with her back to me, adjusting the drip rate on the IV pole. She wore a white lab coat, and her dark hair was pulled back into a tight, neat bun. She moved with a practiced, economical grace, her focus entirely on the boy. "Hello?" I said again, my voice trembling. The woman froze. She didn't startle, she simply stopped, her hand hovering over the IV controls. "You should not be here," she said. Her voice was calm, sharp, and filled with an authority that sent a chill down my spine. She didn't sound like a prisoner. She sounded like she was in charge. "Who are you?" I asked, taking a step back. "What is this place?" She slowly, deliberately turned around. I had braced myself for so many things. I thought I might see the psycho bitch Elijah had screamed about. I thought I might see Lena, the erased sister, broken and hidden away. I was prepared for a ghost. I was not prepared for her. She was beautiful. A black woman, around my own age, with intelligent, piercing eyes, and a face that was etched with exhaustion and a deep, profound sadness. She wasn't scared of me. She just looked weary. She looked at me, really saw me, her eyes taking in my tear-stained face, my disheveled clothes, the grief I was wearing like a second skin. "You must be Seraphina," she said, her voice softening just a fraction. How do you know my name? Who are you?" She took a step toward me, her hands clasping in front of her lab coat. She looked at the boy in the bed, then back at me. She seemed to be making a decision, a calculation that had been years in the making. "This is Julian's real work," she said, gesturing to the lab around us. "This is his atonement." "Atonement for what?" I whispered, my hand instinctively clutching the old key in my pocket. "For Lena? For what they did to his sister?" The woman's eyes widened, a flash of genuine shock. "You know about Lena?" "I found the chest. I found his diary." A single bitter laugh escaped her lips. "The diary? Of course. He was always a writer, always documenting his own guilt." She shook her head. "No, this isn't just about Lena. This is about him." She pointed to the boy in the bed. "This is Julian Jr., our son." The word hit me like a physical blow. "Our son? I don't understand," I stammered, my mind collapsing. "Julian and we tried for years." "You couldn't," she said, her voice flat, devoid of pity. "But we could." She looked me straight in the eye, and the final devastating piece of Julian's secret fell into place, shattering everything I thought I knew, everything I thought we were. "Who are you?" I asked again, but this time it was a desperate plea. "I'm Dr. Annalise Walker," she said, her voice clear and steady in the silent, sterile room. "And I am Julian's wife." "Wife?" The word tore out of my throat, a ragged, strangled sound. It hung in the sterile air of the lab, feeling absurd and impossible. "No, I'm Julian's wife. I'm Seraphina King. We were married for 10 years. Annalise looked at me. There was no victory in her eyes, no malice, just a deep, bone-weary sadness that I recognized. It was the same exhaustion I saw in my own mirror. "No," she said, her voice soft but heavy, like a judge delivering a verdict. "You were his Atlanta wife, the one he showed the world. the one who went to the galas. She took a steadying breath and looked me straight in the eye. I was his Morgan County wife. I was his real one. The floor seemed to fall away. I grabbed the cold steel edge of a lab counter to keep myself from collapsing. A double life. The secret meetings. The weekly business trips to the coast he always lied about. The violent, furious reaction when I'd asked about this farmhouse. It wasn't a secret. It was a whole separate marriage. I don't believe you, I stammered. But the words were hollow. The truth was settling on me like a physical weight. Annalise didn't argue. She didn't need to. She simply tilted her head toward the sleeping boy in the hospital bed. "His name is Julian Jr.," she said, her voice cracking for the first time. "We call him JJ. He is 16 years old." 16. The number was a gunshot. 16 years old. Julian and I had been married for 10. He had this child, this life, this whole other world 6 years before he ever even met me. "He met me," Annalise said, her voice flat, as if reading a lab report, "when I was a graduate student at Johns Hopkins. I was Dr. Lena King's star pupil, her research assistant, her protégé. Lena, the sister from the attic, the erased genius. Julian used to visit his sister's lab constantly," Annalise continued, staring at her son. "He was so proud of her. He met me there. We fell in love before everything fell apart, before Elijah and Claire destroyed her." "You knew?" I whispered. "You knew what they did to her?" "I knew what they claimed happened," she said, her voice hardening. "By the time I realized Lena had been betrayed, that they had stolen her work and had her committed, it was too late. I was already pregnant with JJ. She finally looked back at me. Julian and I, we were married secretly, a justice of the peace. He told me he couldn't leave the family, that Elijah controlled everything, even his inheritance. He said he needed to build his career, to build his own power, so that one day he could fix it." "Fix it?" "He made a bargain," Annalise said. "Elijah allowed him to pursue his architecture career, to build his own reputation, but on one condition. He had to marry appropriately. He had to maintain the King family image. He had to produce an heir with a wife they approved of." The unsaid words hung in the air, suffocating me. "Me," I said. It wasn't a question. "I was the appropriate wife." "You were the Atlanta wife," she said, and for the first time her eyes softened with something that looked like pity. "You were the one he presented to the world, the one who secured his place in the family, the one who was supposed to give him the right children, the ones who weren't. Us." I looked at the boy, JJ, sleeping so peacefully, his face thin, his breathing shallow. "But why? Why all this?" I gestured to the gleaming multi-million-dollar lab. "Why keep lying? Why build this?" Annalise walked back to the bed and gently brushed the dark curls off her son's forehead. "Because the universe has a sick sense of humor," she whispered. "About 4 years ago, JJ started showing symptoms, the tremors, the clumsiness. He kept dropping things. I'm a researcher, Seraphina. I knew the signs." She turned to face me, her eyes glistening. "He has it. The exact same rare genetic condition. He inherited Huntington's disease from Julian's side of the family, the very disease Lena had dedicated her life to curing." My God, the stolen patent. The drug Elijah had sold for billions. It wasn't just about money. It was a cure. "Did Elijah know?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Elijah knew everything," she said, her voice shaking with a rage I was just beginning to understand. "He knew JJ existed, he knew JJ was sick, and he controlled the company that owned the patent. We begged him, Julian begged him. He refused to give his own nephew the medicine. He said it was still in trials. He said it was cost prohibitive. He was letting his nephew die, Seraphina, slowly, just to maintain his control over Julian." "So, Julian," I trailed off, the attic diary, the fighting, the steel door, all of it clicking into place. So Julian finally did what he should have done 15 years ago, Annalise finished for me. He stopped being a coward. He found me. He told me the only person on earth who could save our son was the sister he had betrayed. Lena, I breathed. 2 years ago, Julian liquidated every private asset he had, every stock you didn't know about, every bonus he'd hidden from Elijah. He used that money to fund a private security team. They staged an escape. They broke Lena out of that asylum in Switzerland and flew her here, registering her under a false name. This farmhouse, this lab, it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a prison. It was a sanctuary. He built this for her, Annalise said, her hand sweeping the room. He built this so she could finish her work, so she could save our son, and she's doing it. The drug she's been developing, the real version, the one Elijah's company doesn't have. It's working, Sarah. The tremors are stopping. He's getting better. I sank onto a steel stool, my legs finally giving out. The man I had mourned, the man I had loved, the man I thought I knew. He was a liar. He was a bigamist. He had used me. He was a monster, I whispered. Annalise looked at me, her face a mask of complex pain, of a grief that was 16 years old. No, she said softly. He wasn't a monster. He was a coward, and he was trapped. Elijah had him in a cage. This, she gestured to the lab, to her son. This was him trying to finally, desperately break free. I stared at Annalise, at this woman who claimed to be my husband's real wife, at the 16-year-old boy in the hospital bed who was his son. He was trapped, she said, but that didn't make sense. Trapped? Julian was successful. He was a king. He had millions of his own. Annalise let out a short, bitter laugh, a sound that echoed the emptiness I felt inside. Julian had nothing, she said, her voice dropping. Not really. Elijah controls the trust. And the trust, the money Elijah used to build the entire king fortune, was based on Lena's stolen patent. Julian was just an employee like everyone else. He was given a generous allowance to build his architecture career and maintain his image. Our image. He was trapped, she repeated. And 2 months ago, the trap finally snapped shut. I must have looked confused. Elijah found this place, Annalise explained, her voice flat. He found the farmhouse. He found the steel door. He didn't have the code, but he knew Julian was hiding something. He must have installed trackers on Julian's car. He learned everything. She looked at the sleeping boy. He learned about me. He learned about JJ. A new voice, sharp and cold, cut through the room. And he learned about me. I spun around. A third woman was standing in the corridor entrance. She was older than us, perhaps in her mid-40s, her hair cut short and streaked with gray. Her eyes were blazing with an intensity that was almost terrifying. She wore a simple gray turtleneck and slacks, but she carried herself with an authority that dwarfed everyone, even Elijah. She looked exactly like the portraits in the attic, but harder, honed by 15 years of injustice. Dr. Lena King, I breathed. She nodded curtly, her gaze fixed on me. Elijah found out his crazy sister wasn't safely locked away in Switzerland, Lena said, walking into the lab. He found out I was alive. He found out Julian had a male heir, a secret son, who could one day challenge the king inheritance. She stopped beside JJ's bed and placed a hand on his forehead, her expression softening for just a fraction of a second. But that's not what scared him the most. Annalise looked up at Lena, a shared understanding passing between them. He found out about the new compound. Yes, Lena said. He realized I hadn't just been hiding. I'd been working. The drug Elijah stole 15 years ago, it was a prototype. It had flaws. It slowed the disease, but it didn't stop it. She pointed to the IV bag dripping steadily into her nephew's arm. This is version 2.0. It's a cure. It's the real thing. It makes his stolen patent, the entire foundation of the King Trust, completely worthless. I finally understood. The magnitude of it hit me. That's why Elijah was at the diner, I said, the pieces clicking together. That's why he was screaming at Julian. He gave Julian an ultimatum. Annalise picked up the story, her voice shaking with remembered fury. We were here. We heard the whole thing on speakerphone. Elijah was screaming. He gave Julian 48 hours. I didn't need her to explain. I could guess. He wanted the lab destroyed, I said. Annalise nodded. Destroy the lab, send Lena back to the asylum, and transfer everything, every last dollar Julian had hidden away, into the trust, under Elijah's complete control. And what if he refused? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Elijah promised to expose him, Annalise whispered. He'd tell the world Julian was committing bigamy. He'd tell the medical board he was harboring an unlicensed doctor. He would have sent child services to take JJ. He was going to destroy Julian, destroy us, and seize this research for himself. So Julian agreed? I asked, my heart breaking for this man I didn't even know. No, Annalise said, her eyes flooding with tears. He didn't. He told me he was done being a coward. He said he was done letting Elijah win. He said he was going to meet him one last time, to negotiate, to try and find a way. Her voice broke. He kissed JJ goodbye. He told me he loved me, and he walked out that door. He never came back. A heavy silence filled the lab, broken only by the steady, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor. My grief for Julian felt new and sharper. He hadn't just died. He had been killed. It wasn't an accident, Lena said, her voice terrifyingly flat. She held up a thin, military-grade tablet. I hired my own investigators after the funeral. Julian was a meticulous man. His car was state-of-the-art. It had sensors, maintenance logs. He had it serviced just last month. She swiped the screen, showing me a technical diagram. The police report said brake failure, but the diagnostics I pulled from the car's black box. The brake lines weren't worn. They weren't faulty. She looked up, her eyes locking onto mine. A shared, terrible understanding passing between us. They were cut, cleanly. Elijah didn't just threaten his brother, he murdered him. The word hung in the air, murder. Elijah hadn't just stolen from his sister and blackmailed his brother. He was a killer. He had killed Julian to get this lab, to get this cure, to protect his stolen legacy. And now, he thought he had won. He thought all the threats were gone. He thought I, the weak, grieving widow, was his last, easily managed problem. He was trying to blackmail me for this very building, the evidence of his crime. I looked at Lena, the erased sister, her genius stolen. I looked at Annalise, the secret wife, her son's life in the balance. 3 women, 3 lives Julian had lied to, 3 lives Elijah had tried to destroy. We were the only ones who knew the truth. Annalise looked at me, her face pale but resolute. Elijah is the executor, she said. He controls everything. He's going to come here. He's going to try and take this place, and he's not going to stop until he has it, until he has her. She nodded at Lena. What? I asked, my voice no longer shaking. Are we going to do? The drive back to Atlanta was a blur of adrenaline and icy resolve. The grief for Julian was still there, a heavy stone in my gut, but it was no longer a paralyzing fog. It had crystallized into something sharp, something focused. It had turned into a weapon. I was no longer a grieving widow. I was an executioner. I didn't go back to the King Mansion. That house was a mausoleum of lies, and I was done with it. I checked into a nondescript hotel near the airport, paying in cash from the small fund I'd kept in my old Honda. I sat on the lumpy, unfamiliar bed, took a deep breath, and dialed Elijah's number. I had to become the woman he expected me to be, the weak, pathetic, clueless widow he and Claire had mocked my entire marriage. I had to make my voice shake. I had to cry. He answered on the third ring, his voice sharp and impatient. "What? Elijah?" I whispered, forcing a sob into my throat. "Elijah, it's me, it's Seraphina." There was a long, annoyed sigh on the other end. "What do you want, Seraphina? I'm in the middle of a board meeting. I don't have time for hysterics." I'm, I'm so sorry to bother you," I cried, letting my voice crack. "I don't know who else to call. I have no money. My cards are all declined. I'm at a gas station and I can't even get a hotel room. I don't know what to do." I could almost hear the smug smile forming on his face. "Well, well," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "The independent Mrs. King. It's a cold world out there, isn't it? I told you. I offered you a solution. Did you finally come to your senses?" "Yes," I whispered, as if the word was being torn from me. "Yes, you were right. The farmhouse, it's just a shack. It's awful. I don't want it. I can't do anything with it. That offer you made, the stipend, is it still available? I'll sign the paper, Elijah. I'll sign anything you want. I need help. Please." There was a beat of silence. He was savoring it. He was relishing the sound of my complete and utter surrender. "Good," he said finally, his voice all business. "You've made a wise decision. It shows you're not as stupid as I thought." So will you send the money?" I asked, playing the role of the desperate, greedy fool. "I can come to your office right now." "No," he snapped. "I'm not sending you a dime until your name is off that deed. I'll handle this myself. I'll be at the farmhouse tomorrow night, 7 o'clock. I'll bring the papers and your first check." He wanted to see it himself. He wanted to watch me sign away the last piece of my life. He wanted to be there, on site, to finally get his hands on that lab. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay. Thank you, Elijah. I'll be there." "And Seraphina," he added, his voice turning cold. "Not a word of this to anyone. Not to my mother, not to Thornton, not to anyone. This is a private family matter. A kindness I am extending to you. For Julian's legacy. Do you understand?" "Yes," I said. "I understand. For Julian's legacy." I hung up the phone, and my hand was perfectly steady. The tears dried instantly. The mask was off. "He's coming," I said to the empty room. "The trap is set." I immediately drove back to the farmhouse. Lena and Annalise were waiting, their faces pale with anxiety. "He's coming," I told them, "tomorrow night. He thinks I'm going to sign it over for a monthly check." Lena, the brilliant scientist who had been erased by her own family, nodded slowly. "Good. Then we have work to do." Annalise, the secret wife who had watched her son's life hang in the balance, looked at me with a new, fierce respect. "What's the plan?" "We are not going to be the only ones waiting for him," I said. "We need allies who can't be bought." We made 2 calls. Annalise made the first one from a secure, encrypted satellite phone Julian had installed in the lab. She dialed a number from memory. "Mr. Thornton, this is Dr. Annalise Walker. I'm calling from the Morgan County facility." "Yes, sir. I'm calling about your son, Julian Jr." I watched Annalise as she spoke, her voice calm and professional. "His latest labs are remarkable. The tremors have stopped completely. Yes, Dr. Lena King is personally overseeing his treatment. She is a remarkable woman, sir." There was a long pause. Annalise listened, then said, "Mr. Thornton, the man who tried to suppress this cure, the man who stole it from Dr. King, and the man who murdered her brother, is Elijah King. He is coming here tomorrow night to destroy this lab and everyone in it. We need your help, not as a lawyer, As a father. She hung up and looked at me. He'll be here. He said he's bringing the full power of the law with him. Good, I said. Now for my call. I dialed a number I knew by heart. A cell phone belonging to Jamal Washington, an old college friend who had become one of the most respected investigative reporters in the country. A man who owed his career to a tip I'd given him years ago, and who, like me, had a deep-seated hatred for the kind of entitled, corrupt power the King family represented. Jamal? It's Sarah. Seraphina King. Sarah? My God, I heard about Julian. I'm so sorry. I tried to reach you. I'm fine, Jamal. I cut him off. But I need you. Do you remember that story you were always looking for? The big one? The one that would take down an empire? There was a silence on the line. What do you have, Sarah? I have the real story of the King family, I said, my voice steady. I have a stolen, life-saving medical patent. I have a secret multi-million-dollar lab. I have a sister who was erased. And I have proof that my husband's car accident wasn't an accident. How fast can you get to Morgan County? I'm on my way, he said. The trap was laid. The players were in position. All we had to do now was wait for the king to walk into it. The farmhouse was silent when I arrived, but it wasn't the empty, sterile silence from before. It was the charged, electric silence of a trap about to spring. I sat in the dimly lit living room, the one Claire had called a dump, and I waited. Downstairs, in the hidden laboratory, Annalise was monitoring JJ's vitals, her presence a steady hum of technology below my feet. In the dark hallway leading to the kitchen, Lena was waiting, a shadow of 15 years of rage and patience. I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel outside. They were early. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird in a cage, but I pressed my hands flat on my knees, forcing them to be still. I heard their voices before I saw them, sharp and impatient, cutting through the night air. The front door opened without a knock. Elijah strode in like he already owned the place, which, in his mind, he did. Claire followed close behind, her high-heeled boots clicking on the wooden floor. She was already wrinkling her nose. "My God," she said, her voice echoing in the sparse room. "This place is even worse than I remembered. It smells like antiseptic and failure." Her eyes found me, sitting on the beige sofa. "Seraphina, let's get this over with. Sign the papers. I refuse to breathe this country air for one more minute." Elijah didn't bother with greetings. He tossed a heavy, leather-bound document folder onto the glass coffee table. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Sign it," he commanded. He pulled out the same expensive pen from the lawyer's office. "The waiver. For the house. And the check. As we discussed." I looked at the papers, at the signature line waiting for me. I looked at Elijah's impatient, arrogant face. I looked at Claire, who was examining one of the cheap table lamps with open disgust. "You know," I said, my voice surprisingly calm, "I was thinking about what you said, about Julian's legacy." "What about it?" Elijah snapped. "His legacy is my responsibility. Now sign." "His legacy is complicated," I said, and I stood up. "He told me he buried his mistakes here. But he wasn't just talking about the house. He was talking about his real family." Claire scoffed. "What are you rambling about now? Are you drunk? We are his real family. You were a temporary attachment. Now sign the paper." "No," I said. "I don't think I will." I pushed the folder back across the table. "Because before I sign anything, I think you both need to meet the real King legacy, the one you tried to bury." Elijah's eyes narrowed. "What game are you playing, Seraphina? I don't have time for this." "This isn't a game," I said. "She's been waiting 15 years to see you." I turned toward this dark hallway. "Lena, they're here." A shadow detached itself from the darkness. A figure walked slowly into the light of the living room. Dr. Lena King. Her hair was cut short, her eyes were like burning coals, and she was staring directly at her brother. Time stopped. Elijah froze, his face a mask of utter, complete disbelief. He looked like he had seen a ghost. But Claire screamed. It wasn't a small sound. It was a high-pitched, guttural shriek of pure animal terror. "No!" she yelled, stumbling backward, knocking over the lamp she had just been mocking. "No, it's not possible." She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at Lena. You're supposed to be in Switzerland. You're supposed to be locked up." Her voice cracked, rising in hysteria. "I paid the doctors. I made sure you were declared incompetent. You're supposed to be gone." She clapped her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with the sudden, terrible realization of what she had just admitted. She had confessed. In front of me. In front of her husband. She had just confessed to conspiracy, bribery, and false imprisonment. Elijah didn't seem to hear his wife's confession. His shock had instantly curdled into pure, murderous rage. This was the one loose end, the one person who could destroy him, and she was here. "You!" he roared. It wasn't a word. It was the sound of an animal. "You ruined everything!" He lunged, not at me, at Lena. He crossed the room in 2 powerful strides, his hands outstretched, his face purple with rage, aiming directly for her throat. Lena didn't even flinch. She just watched him come. The front door and the back door burst open at the same instant. The room was suddenly, violently flooded with bodies. Police officers in tactical vests, their weapons drawn. "Elijah King, get on the ground, now!" Elijah stopped, his hands just inches from Lena's face. He looked around wildly, a trapped animal. From the front door, Mr. Thornton, the family lawyer, stepped in. His face was like stone. "Elijah King," he said, his voice booming with an authority I had never heard. "You are under arrest for the attempted assault of Dr. Lena King." "And," another voice said, calm and clear. A man stepped in from the back, a video camera resting on his shoulder, its red recording light glowing. It was Jamal Washington, my college friend, the investigative reporter. "You're also under arrest," Jamal said, his lens pointed straight at Elijah's face. "For conspiracy, wire fraud, and for the murder of your brother, Julian King." Elijah looked at me. His face wasn't angry anymore. It was empty. He knew. He finally understood. He had underestimated me. He had underestimated the wife he thought was weak, the sister he thought was broken, and the brother he thought was a coward. Claire was a heap on the floor, sobbing hysterically. "I didn't know," she wept, her words captured by Jamal's microphone. "I didn't know about the car. I only did the asylum. I just wanted her gone." The police cuffed Elijah. As they led him past me, his eyes met mine. They were filled with a cold, bottomless hatred. "You," he whispered. I just looked back at him. "Yes," I said. "Me." Annalise appeared from the hallway, standing beside Lena. The 3 of us. The wife he presented, the sister he erased, and the wife he hid. We stood together and watched as the King Empire, built on lies and theft and murder, was finally dragged out into the night. The night at the farmhouse was the end of the King dynasty as Atlanta knew it. The story exploded. It wasn't just local news. It was national. Jamal's explosive on-the-scene report went viral. The arrest of Elijah King, the untouchable titan of Atlanta finance, for the murder of his own brother, was a scandal that shook the city. But the real story, the one that captured the nation's heart, was the one Jamal's report told. The story of the brilliant, erased sister, Dr. Lena King. Elijah's trial was swift. He hired the best lawyers the King Trust could buy, but he couldn't fight the evidence. He couldn't fight Julian's meticulous, guilt-ridden diary. He couldn't fight the diagnostic data from the car's black box. And he certainly couldn't fight his own wife. Claire, facing charges of conspiracy, accessory to murder, and false imprisonment, did what she had always done. She prioritized her own survival. She turned state's evidence, giving the prosecution every single detail. She recounted in cold, clinical terms how she and Elijah had systematically plotted Lena's demise 15 years ago. She detailed the bribes, the fake psychiatric reports, the lies she had fed the family. Her spontaneous confession at the farmhouse. "I made sure you were declared incompetent. I just wanted her gone," but was played on a loop on every major news network. Elijah was convicted of first-degree murder, fraud, and a dozen other charges. He will spend the rest of his life in prison, the King legacy he fought so hard to protect reduced to a 6-by-8 cell. Claire, in exchange for her testimony, received a lighter sentence for her role in Lena's false imprisonment, but her true punishment was social and absolute. She lost everything. The money was seized. The Atlanta elite, the very people she had lived her life to impress, shunned her completely. The legacy she had married into was destroyed, not by me or by Lena, but by the poison they had cultivated themselves. While Elijah's paper empire crumbled, Lena's rose. With the evidence from the farmhouse and Julian's diary, her name was cleared. The state medical board issued a formal public apology and immediately reinstated her license. The psychiatric diagnosis was expunged, exposed as a malicious calculated fraud. She was, legally and publicly, Dr. Lena King again. Her next battle was with the pharmaceutical giant that had grown fat on her stolen patent. They saw the public relations nightmare unfolding. A brilliant black female scientist, erased and locked away while they made billions off her cure? It was catastrophic. They immediately offered her a settlement, a check with 9 zeros. I was there, in their sterile boardroom, when Lena met their CEO. She looked at the settlement offer on the table and gently slid it back across the polished wood. "I don't want your money," she said, her voice quiet but echoing in the massive room. "I want my work back." They tried to argue, to say the original patent was legally theirs. That's when Lena played her final card. "The drug you've been selling for 15 years?" She said. "It's obsolete. It's the rough draft. I've spent my time in isolation, perfecting it." She revealed the existence of version 2.0, the actual cure, the one currently saving her nephew's life. Her demand was simple. It wasn't revenge, it was justice. "You will continue to manufacture my original drug," she commanded, "but you will provide it at cost. You will set up non-profit distribution chains to every low-income community in this country. You will fund free clinics. You will make zero profit from the cure you stole." The CEO was furious. "And why would we do that?" "Because," Lena said, standing up, "if you don't, I will release the formula for version 2.0 onto the internet, free for the world to use. I will make your multi-billion-dollar asset worthless overnight. Your move." They signed the new contract within the hour. The final loose end was the most complicated: Julian. The law had to untangle the fact that he had 2 wives. In the end, the courts, facing unprecedented legal and public pressure, recognized the validity of both marriages. They acknowledged that one was a public, social contract, and the other was a private, hidden but proven union. Annalise and I were left to divide what remained of Julian's personal estate, mainly his life insurance. The media expected us to fight. The official wife versus the secret wife. They didn't know us. We met at the farmhouse in the lab where her son was now learning to walk again, his tremors gone. "He lied to both of us," Annalise said, watching JJ play. "He used you for his image, and he hid me for his heart. We both deserved better." "Yes, we did," I agreed, "but he also gave us this." I looked at Lena, who was reviewing research at her station. "He gave us a chance to finish his work. We didn't divide the money, we pooled it. Julian's insurance, the small funds I had, and the first royalties from Lena's new and proper contracts." 1 year later, I stood on the porch of the farmhouse. It was no longer a sterile, empty stage. It had been transformed. The main house was now a residence for families undergoing long-term treatment. The hidden, three-story lab below was now the King Washington Biomedical Center. I stood between Lena and Annalise. We were watching the dedication ceremony. Mr. Thornton, the lawyer, was at the podium, his voice thick with emotion as he thanked the center for saving his own son's life, the young man who had been Lena's first patient. JJ, now 17 and healthy, was in the front row, looking at his mother, Annalise, with pure adoration. I was no longer Mrs. King, the trophy wife from Atlanta. I was Seraphina Washington, co-founder and director of the King Washington Center, a place that provided cutting-edge, free medical care to the very communities Elijah's greed had preyed upon. Lena was the head of research, finally given the resources and recognition she deserved. Annalise was the chief administrator, the heart of the entire operation. I thought about Julian. I had spent months wrestling with my anger at his lies, his cowardice. But looking at what we had built, I finally understood his final letter. He hadn't just left me a key to a secret. He had left me his confession, his atonement, and his trust. He knew I was the only one who could navigate the worlds of both Elijah and Lena. He knew I had the strength to expose the truth. He couldn't fix his own mistakes, so he had trusted me to do it for him. Lena squeezed my hand. Annalise leaned her head on my shoulder for just a moment. We were not a traditional family. We were something better. We were a family forged in betrayal, bound by justice, and built on the true King legacy. And as I looked out at the crowd, I finally, truly, forgave my husband. This story teaches us that family is not defined by blood, but by trust, loyalty, and the courage to protect one another. Betrayal from those closest to us is devastating, but remaining silent allows toxic cycles of abuse to continue. Seraphina's journey shows that true strength lies in seeking the truth, even when it's terrifying. By bravely confronting the lies, she didn't just expose a crime, she honored her husband's true, compassionate legacy and built a new, stronger family forged in shared purpose and respect. Have you ever had to choose between a painful family loyalty and the truth? Share your story in the comments below.